Now, we've talked exclusively up until this moment about women facing sexual harassment in the workplace. And that, similar to the conversation around rape and sexual assault, almost always is discussed only in terms of women as the victims and men as the perpetrators. I myself, as a woman in the workplace, have experienced probably more than I can count incidents of sexual harassment. In all of these cases, it has been men. But that isn't the only face of sexual harassment. And that is something that your report, but also you personally have looked into. I'm finding this, particularly in this moment, to be connected to what I felt and what many others in the media felt was a different reaction and a different tone when the accusations against Kevin Spacey came to light because they were by men. What do we know about sexual harassment against men in the workplace?
So two things. Number one, about 16% of our complaints of sexual harassment come from men. Now, some of that might be men being harassed by other men. A few, and I've seen cases of men being harassed by women. And by the way, harassment is not just from a supervisor to a subordinate. A lot of harassment is from coworkers. And one of the cases was a coworker that kept asking this guy for a date and wouldn't say no.
It's one of my own personal experiences as well. And actually, in that case, it was a woman.
Right.
So it can take a lot of different forms.
It can take a lot of different forms. A lot of the cases actually do have to deal with men harassing other men. And then there's a second layer of shame in terms of coming forward. So I think we need to understand as a country that harassment, sexual harassment, happens to both women and men. And that actually harassment happens on all bases, race, religion, disability, and that's something our report focused on. However, what I have discovered in terms of talking to people, that sometimes it's just useful to start with the sexual harassment against women. Somehow that brings people into the conversation, and then it is our obligation to push forward and say, if we can change the workplace culture, if employers and employees take the steps to change workplace culture so that harassment doesn't happen, unwelcome behavior doesn't happen, it will help everyone.
Sort of the curb cuts mentality that when you're fighting for rights for one frequently marginalized community, it can actually have widespread benefits.
Absolutely. It's what we call in disability rights universal design. If you make it work for people with disabilities, a lot of other people will benefit.
So let's talk about solutions. Let's talk about how we get there. The EEOC's report looks into a number of different kind of current solutions, or the solutions people think have been solutions. I sort of hesitate to call them solutions because part of what you find is that the trainings, that kind of annual sexual harassment training that everyone knows, everyone groans about when they see it on the schedule or see the email come from HR, right? You look at that and you say, well, those actually haven't been very successful as prevention tools. Really, they're sort of, management kind of covering their ass, saying, let's limit some liability. That's why those get held. That's really what they do. What do you think could work, and are we seeing anything already in place or in use in the workplace that actually does work as a prevention tool?
So this is what I feel is one of the real contributions of our report, that we took the motto of James Baldwin of not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So the first half of the report is really about what's going on. The second part is about how do we change it, with no illusions about how difficult it is to change. Training is absolutely important, but it's only important as essentially step 4 of a 5-step comprehensive process. So don't take from the report that training isn't essential. It's just what type of training and where is it in the comprehensive effort.
And that it can't be the only thing we do.
It so cannot be the only thing you do. If it's the only thing you do and nothing else right is happening, people will groan and it will reinforce their cynicism. So where do you do it? I remember often hearing it starts at the top. And I often felt like, oh, well, that's very helpful. I mean, thank you for sharing. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And that's what our report drilled down on. So it does start at the top. It starts with leadership feeling a sense of urgency of wanting to find out if there's harassment in their workplace and stopping it. Has to start with the leaders caring about stopping it and communicating that in words. Step 1. Step 2, employees hear leaders say lots of things. Employees have to believe the leaders are authentic, that they mean what they say. Okay, step 3, how do leaders do that? Number 1, they make it a point to find out what's going on in their workplace. If they see our report that says 70% of people are not even coming forward, how are they going to find out if they have a problem? Our recommendation is that they do an anonymous survey that doesn't ask, have you experienced sexual harassment or other forms of harassment, that lists the behaviors. Have you experienced any of this? Educate themselves. 2, put into place the policies. Here's the policy of what we will not accept. Don't spend a lot of legalese about what's illegal. No, this is what we won't accept. Here's how you report it. Have a reporting and investigation system that works. Okay. And then, most importantly, accountability. You can say all the words you want, but if people don't see action, they will not believe that you are authentic. The harassment will continue.
So I'm gonna come back at you here with a little bit of the devil's advocate, but meaning it, because all of that sounds great, right? If we could just get all those things to happen, then boom, we would have way less sexual harassment in the workplace. It makes sense intuitively, but even getting to step 1 feels like I don't even know how we get there when we've in many cases got senior leadership. We saw this at Fox News. We've seen this now as, throughout Hollywood. People actually knowing and being totally aware of what's going on, but sweeping it under the rug and using tools like mandatory confidential arbitration, which sounds like legal gobbledygook, right? I apologize. I don't know how often on the show for being a recovering lawyer, but it means literally legally being able to sweep it under the rug. When that's the instinct on the part of people who in senior positions are aware of what's going on, how do we even get to that 5-step process that you talked about?
See, here is where I think we are at a tipping point. I really think so, because the incentives for top leaders may now be changing, especially for what we call in the report the superstar harassers, someone of high value to the company. The leadership often made the cost-benefit analysis that it was more costly to take the complaint seriously and get rid of the person than to simply pay off the people making the complaints. I think that leaders are now realizing that might not be a smart cost-benefit analysis, and that it is worth it for them to start taking these complaints seriously. I remember hearing from some people, well, I'm not going to go to HR. HR is not your friend. HR is just working for the company. And I say, they sure are working for the company. And you know what? To protect the company, they need to take complaints seriously. And I'm talking about through the entire level of the organization. So it's almost like we're going to flip what helps the company. Move it away from that short-term cost-benefit analysis of what will help the companies to sweep it under the rug to what will help the company is to stop something before it goes out of control.
And is that a function of policy change that we have yet to see and that we need to see? Or is that more rooted in the culture change that we're watching happen as we speak because accusers are being believed and because this tidal wave is happening right now?
I believe it is absolutely an attitudinal cultural change, not a policy change. They have all had their policies for years, especially the big companies. It's about changing the incentives. And I will tell you, if a leadership of a company, for-profit, nonprofit, actually holds people accountable and people in the organization see that someone has been disciplined, even up to and including termination, that will send ripples through the organization. And accountability is with regard to 2 groups of people. One group is the smaller group, the people who are actually engaging in the harassment, regardless of regardless of their value. The other group that needs to be the other group that needs to be held accountable are the frontline supervisors, the managers who hear the complaints, because their reaction often is to belittle the person, see whether they were at blame. Let's talk about what you were doing in this interaction, right? If they are now rewarded for actually taking a complaint seriously and going through whatever the policy says, as opposed to sweeping it under the rug, we will start seeing a difference.